Welcome to the YA edition of Meet the Creator for January 2025. And I am in the very lucky position today of discussing Alice Nuttall's debut novel with her, The Zombie Project. And I have to tell you guys, this kept me reading all weekend. So, I'm really keen on it. I'm looking forward to talking to you, Alice. Thank you for coming along.
No problem at all. It's lovely to be here.
Are you happy to give us a little bit of a reading to start us off, please?
I am, yes. So, yeah, got my copy here. So. Marion woke up to a zombie tapping on the window. Tink, tink, tink. She knew the sound well, the clack of bone on glass followed by a wheezy moan. Grumbling, Marion tried to go back to sleep. Tink, tink, tink. Go away. Marion rolled over and opened the curtains, letting in the sunrise and a zombie's stare. The zombie had one cloudy blue eye, while the other was just an empty socket. Its jaw flopped open, showing a row of broken yellow teeth before snapping shut again. It was a great specimen, Marion had to admit, but her bed was warm and comfy. She snuggled back down under the covers. Maybe if she ignored it, it'd go away. Marion, can you deal with that, please? Ugh. Sighing, Marion sat up. Zombies normally gave up after a few hours. The same couldn't be said of her mum.
Excellent. And that's the first shock for me is how casual she is. Zombie tapping at the window and she's just like, oh, well, okay.
Yeah, that was actually the idea that kind of the book grew out of. I was thinking it's the idea that came into my head of someone seeing a zombie outside their house and being just like, oh, well, that's Tuesday kind of thing. It's, I wanted a sort of a world where that was normal in a way.
Excellent. Well, that leads me to my first question. So what inspired you to write this story, being a debut novel?
So I basically, actually, this story was one that I was writing while I was working on another story about Norse mythology that I was pitching around to people. And this was sort of my little play project that I had going on the rest of the time. When I was like, needed a break from the other book, I was like, I'd come and work on this. I started off with that idea I had of just the girl looking out the window, seeing a zombie and not being fazed by it at all. And also I'm very interested in environmentalism and sort of ecology and things like that, and that also developed into the book as I was writing it.
Which leads me so well into my next question. You are just a dream. You're a dream this morning. So can you explain to those that haven't, of course, yet read the book, the role of the bees and the death flies and their importance in this story, please?
Of course, yes. So the Zombie Project is set in a world where the bees and other pollinators died off because of climate change. That happens about a generation before the book starts. Marion, my main character, her mother remembers when, this kind of that when the pollinators collapsed and when the world changed very drastically. And basically there was, at that point there was a lot of like food shortages, rising tensions, that kind of thing. And it was actually solved by the fact that, a glacier melts and brings these, these creatures called the death flies down across the rest of the world. In the world I've set up, zombies have always existed in the mountains. And the people there have just grown up like, used to them, like they're a natural part of life. And that kind of becomes the case for the rest of the world as well after the pollinators leave and the glacier collapses, taking the death flies across the rest of the world. And basically it ends up that is actually what saves the world and stops the food shortages at that point before the book starts. The zombies are animated by these creatures called death flies, which are also pollinators, and so that stops the food shortages. And so the zombies are actually a necessary part of the life cycle.
Which is so novel. I loved it. Absolutely loved it. So there are so many different themes in this book that would work really well with young people. There are also very strong themes of anti-corporatism and the role that fake news has in the book versus science. Are they themes that you feel very strongly about?
Definitely, yes. I think like as we're seeing with all the basically the climate disturbances at the moment, it's because there's so many corporations that are so keen on extracting profit at all costs, even if it's going to cause absolute devastation to humanity and the environment. And so I definitely wanted that to be a strong message in the book, because that's what's happening in our world at the moment. And again, with the fake news and again, one of the, as you said, one of the major themes in the story is, Marion realizes that what's being broadcast on the news is being controlled by these corporations who have the money to control the news outlets. And so that's something that we really need to bear in mind, I think, like all generations. But I think it's very helpful if young people grow up realizing it, that when you see a news story that maybe doesn't seem quite right, you have to kind of think about, okay, who is like funding the source that this comes from, basically.
Very much so. And I thought the role that you had with the TikTokers, if you like, TikTokers, that was really interesting, because it was straight away, everything is not always as it seems. Mm-hmm. And at the moment, that's very topical, because with the recent banning and then reinstating of TikTok in the States.
Yes, yeah.
There was an awful lot that came out that there were several very large TikTokers that actually admitted before going dark that it was completely fake.
Yes, yeah, I think so, yeah.
And that really had resonance with me. I think the other thing that I think is exceptional about the story is the fact that, yes, it's YA, but it's young YA. We do have a real lack of books that are targeted towards that, 12 to 14 sort of age, that they're a bit too old for middle grade, but the higher YA is perhaps a bit too frightening for them. And I think this sits in the perfect sweet zone for that.
Thank you.
I think that's wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Now, I did already mention to you before we started talking about my own 2 cats that are on the floor.
Yes.
And I absolutely loved the idea and the role that the 2 cats play in your book. Can you explain that a little bit to us? And also, does that come from you being a cat lover yourself, and why cats?
Oh, very much so. I mean, I love cats and dogs as well, I will say that. But I think the kind of the trend in a lot of zombie media, and I read and watch a lot of zombie related stories, is that it's usually people have a dog, that like the group will have a dog that will warn them about zombies. And I was thinking, basically the main reason is I just wanted to put my 2 cats, Jack and Ollie, into the story because they're lovely, and they wouldn't be very good zombie early morning creatures, because they're a lot more lazy in real life than they are in the book. But I think most zombie stories, the animal character in it is a dog, and I thought, well, actually dogs that I love them, but they are loud and they're very kind of good working animals, but they make a lot of noise, and that would attract zombies, whereas cats are a lot more quiet. And I had this idea of using cats as a sort of early warning system, because they're very alert to what's going on in their environment and can kind of pick up on things before humans can, in the same way as dogs, but they don't have that, like the noise of barking and things like that. They would just, they run or fluff up or that kind of thing. So that was why I included them.
I absolutely loved it. I loved the fact that they were going out into the city with a cat around their neck. It's like, this is just bliss. It would be bliss for me. I'd love that. So are zombie books your preferred choice when you're reading?
Definitely one of my favorite choices. Yes. I read incredibly widely. I read a lot of middle grade and YA, because that's the area I've enjoyed writing in. And I love those stories. I think middle grade and YA, we're seeing a real kind of golden age of that kind of literature at the moment.
Great.
I also read a lot of detective stories, and I'm actually quite a late comer to horror stories in general. But it's kind of worked out that that's what I've ended up writing. But I really enjoy that kind of area. So
that's kind of the opposite for me, funnily enough, because when I was a teenager, I read lots of horror. Stephen King, James Herbert, all of that sort of thing, probably at far too early an age, actually, that I read all of those. And then as I've got older, I think I've become more Scare-averse.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
And I don't know whether that's since I had children, actually, that
It's
it kind of
quite
changed a bit
possible.
for me, which is
Yeah.
really
Mm-hmm.
interesting to me.
Yeah,
Really
definitely.
interesting that
Mm-hmm.
way. So, are we allowed to ask,
Mm-hmm.
what are you working on next?
I've got a few different things in the pipeline at the moment. Again, like with the zombie project, I usually have a couple of things on the go, so I can kind of move between one when if I'm a bit stuck with one, I can move to the other. So yeah, I've got a potential kind of fantasy story I'm working on. I've also got I've got some horror stories that I'm in like the early stages of planning out. One's a sort of haunted house story, one's more of a slasher based story. So definitely kind of playing around with some ideas at the moment, sort of in the early stages.
Lovely position to be in. Absolutely
Definitely, yeah.
lovely position to be in. Okay, so if you could, let's finish off with a recommendation. If you could recommend one zombie book that you think everybody should read, what would you pick?
Zombie book. Okay. Yeah. So the one I would recommend is it's called Zombies: A Record of the Year of Infection, Field Notes by Dr. Robert Twombly, which is quite a title, but it's a fantastic. I actually listened to the audio book, but I believe it's a graphic novel in its main form. It's kind of doing this record of an outbreak from the perspective of a guy who's kind of trapped in the middle of it and doesn't really get much information from like official sources, so you are kind of piecing it together along with him. I found that absolutely fascinating. It was a really, really good book and very tense and very, very well put together.
Do you find, I mean, that's another thing that's occurred to me. Do you find reading the physical book scarier or listening to it on audiobook? Because I know there's a real difference for me personally.
I think with this one, it definitely was scarier listening to it on audiobook, because I was kind of listening to it as I was out and about walking and things like that, and so it was I was actually in the sort of countryside at the time when I was listening to a lot of it, so it definitely felt a bit more immersive than I think it would have felt otherwise. Yeah.
And do you ever, when you're writing, scare yourself?
Not so far, no, definitely. I think again because I'm writing for a kind of, I mean, I know children's stories can definitely be scary and they can definitely pull on a lot of your fears, but I think because of the age group I'm writing for, I haven't scared myself yet, but I'm not ruling that out in future.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
That's all right, no problem.
Absolutely love the book. I love the book.
Thank you. I'm so glad you enjoyed it.
Forward with real interest to what you come out with next. So thank you very much.
Thank you.